Last reading for this treatise on toleration by John Locke to the chapters 10, 11, and 12. And these have the character of an appendix, something added on. The main argument really has finished by chapter 9, and there are just a few topics that Locke feels he has to finish up in these last chapters. So we should understand that the reading for today has this character. The main work is done, but there are some subordinate topics that we should understand in order to understand toleration thoroughly. So let me just touch on each of these chapters briefly to say something about what's in them. The title to chapter 10 is the clearest of the three. It says what it's about. There are some limits to toleration. There are some things that the government should not tolerate in religious bodies. And it's a question for us is, what is Locke saying? Is Locke saying that there are some places where toleration is really inappropriate, we shouldn't push it too far? Or is he saying that there are some things in religion that violate the proper principles of toleration and therefore call on the government to suppress them? So we'll take a look at that. But generally, I think chapter 10 is clear, and it should be in the ability of your own reading to work it out. There are four main topics that make up chapter 10, and our translator, the man who prepared these texts and made them available, distinguishes them quite clearly with numbers, and so it will be part of your preparation for class to know what the four are and to understand the arguments about each of them. Now, chapter 11 has the title Gatherings. Gatherings is an ordinary word for whenever people get together, when they gather in one place. So any club or meeting or party or religious ceremony is a gathering if it gets a crowd. But the topic really has to do with the exclusive nature of religious organizations and the suspicion that seems naturally, or at least ordinarily much of the time, to come to outsiders. And people are gathering together when they're getting together to do something that outsiders don't understand. This creates some suspicion, and that can lead to trouble and violations of the proper principles of toleration. So Locke wants to talk about that, and he makes an argument that we are still using. I don't know if he was the first to make it, but it was an early form. And it's the form of it, the logic of it is powerful in our modern liberal society. So it's well worth our considering how it works. He doesn't simply say there's never anything to be suspicious about, but he wants to ask, what's the source of that suspicion? What would be the source even of those real violations of the principles of toleration or the real principles of patriotism that sometimes go on in religious organizations? Do they come from religion, or do they come from intolerance? And he makes the second argument. He says the reason people are suspicious and sometimes have cause to be suspicious, the reason sometimes exclusive religious bodies do unpatriotic things that are against the common good, the reason is not the religion, but the intolerance they feel from others. So we will take a look at that argument. And finally, chapter 12 starts out with a few definitions. There are heretics, people who have wrong opinions about religion. There are schisms, that religions sometimes break apart, that people within one religion start to develop different opinions to the point where they can't all pray together anymore. And that causes a schism, so that they split. And some people go off this way and the others go off that way to be with people who agree with them and away from the people they are having arguments with. And then the people who push these divisions and are likely to make these divisions are then called schismatics. So he seems here at the end just to make a few definitions to clarify the language, but I think we can see that he is speaking particularly to the Protestants of his own nation and advocating for a certain understanding of Christianity. And perhaps that's why this comes at the end. Because it's very important, he speaks to his countrymen and women, the people that he shares a community with, and gives them a recommendation. But finally, in the end, he speaks not neutrally to all religions and making arguments that any person of any kind of religion would think equally important. At the end, he makes an argument that seems especially important for English Protestants, and that comes with a recommendation for how they should regard their particular kind of religion, and what would be a good way to carry on among themselves, and what would be a good way to think about the people who do not share that religion. And so then it deserves the honor of being in the last place because it's particularly important to him. But we should understand, I think, that that's the topic, and that the title and the opening might mislead us to the argument that's really here. Now, before I go into the details of each chapter, let me say a little bit about what we've done in the main body of the work. As I say, I think we had the main argument completed by last reading. At the end of chapter 9, we've seen his main argument, and that would be worth revisiting. That here on page 18 in chapter 8, there's an important passage where he takes on what I think is the hardest problem, the problem of morality, and to which of the two main authorities does it belong to? Is morality a matter of a religion, or is it a matter of government? That's the most difficult challenge he faces. Overall, he makes his argument work by making a clear border between those things, a division of labor by dividing up the work and the responsibility, and making it as clear as he possibly can what the business of the church is, what it's supposed to do, what the business of religion is, what it's responsible for, and on the other hand, what the business of government is and what it's responsible for. And he ends with the difficult argument about morality because it's the hardest case, and it's in some ways impossible to say that religion belongs either to religion or to government. It has to be shared by both. But shared things threaten his argument because they suggest that the religion and the state should work together, that the state should lend its worldly power to religion to exercise control, and that the religion should lend its heavenly authority to the state to make its actions more than merely things for this life. And that would not be according to the proper doctrine of toleration, so that's a threat. But let's not get lost in what's hardest, but make sure that we understand what's basic. And for that, I'd recommend the example he makes with sacrifices. I've turned to page 14. Pages 14 and 15 are important text. If this isn't clear to you, those would be good places to look back at and review. Locke considers whether the government has any authority to tell churches that they cannot have an animal sacrifice, something about human beings that we tend to include in our prayers and in our worship of God, the killing of animals. Then Locke wonders whether it's ever the government business to say they can, to say they should, say it would be better if they do or don't, or absolutely forbid it. And his solution to this problem, or his answer to this question, is that governments can never prevent sacrifices, even if it's also true that the governments don't always allow killing, and certainly a human sacrifice no proper government would ever allow, and even animal sacrifices they would prevent. But the distinction between killing and sacrificing is precisely the principle on which Locke draws the line. So a government would never prevent a sacrifice explicitly in those terms, because the government has no opinion about whether a certain killing is pleasing to God or not. But the government will most definitely prevent killing or allow it. That the killing of animals for food is an ordinary part of human life, and the government allows it, even protects it, and could encourage it. In the case where, if there's an illness among the herd of cattle that threatens the life and livelihood of the community, then that's very much the government's business to step in and interfere. But if you can understand that principle, that the matter of sacrifices seems to threaten the principles of toleration, that the borders are clear because the government never encourages or prevents sacrifices as sacrifices, even if it sometimes encourages or prevents killing as killing. If you can understand that distinction, then you've got the basics down, and you're doing well with the argument. If not, I urge you to look back at chapter 6, pages 14 and 15, in order to make better sense of it.